this must have been like at the level of like the Battle of Lexington and Concord, the Battle of Bunker Hill, and the Battle of Fort McHenry, where the Star Spangled Banner came from.
The Battle of New Orleans?
Battle of New Orleans. Like, these are battles that made presidents. The Battle of the Bulge with Eisenhower, D-Day with Eisenhower.
Yeah.
This has to be like a great battle.
Hello and welcome back to the Buck Starts Here, the podcast that digs deep into the juicy stories, power plays, and wild twists that shaped the long presidency of William Henry Harrison. I'm Kyle, the Tyler 2 to Eric's Mr. Harrison. Today we're talking all things Tippecanoe. I've been waiting a couple weeks now to hear Eric justify why he chose to dedicate an episode to this battle as opposed to, I don't know, liberating Detroit, but I guess we get to find that out today.
First off, I feel like we've already talked about liberation of Detroit and made Joel feel bad about himself, and I can only make my Canadian brothers feel so bad about themselves because I love Canada.
I thought we agreed that they were not Canadian at the time, and it was okay.
It will always be Canadians to me. It's like that meme where the guy's like, it's always real to me.
Can we just blame French Canada?
French Canada? That'd be wicked funny because it's British Canada. There's definitely somebody who blames the French Canadians for that.
Oh, I bet.
No. So the reason I wanted to do this episode is because we're all taught in school, like the only thing we know about William Henry Harrison is like his slogan, Tippecanoe and Tyler too, right? And we're going to talk about Tyler. And I was like, well, what happened to the Battle of Tippecanoe? So like, at first, in my head, I'm like, this must have been this most epic battle, right? This must have been like the greatest, like at the level of like the Battle of Lexington and Concord, or the battle, or even though that wasn't that large of a battle, the Battle of Bunker Hill, the Battle of Fort McHenry, where the Star Spangled Banner came from.
The Battle of New Orleans?
The Battle of New Orleans. Like, these are battles that made presidents. The Battle of the Bulge with Eisenhower, D-Day with Eisenhower. Yeah. This has to be like a great battle. Nope. No? This wouldn't even this and the grand history of military engagements. This is like a footnote. No, this isn't even a footnote. This is just something you would ignore. You would just ignore. And it's a president. It's a battle that made a president. And so I start looking in here, and I'm just like, I wonder how many people fought in it, right?
Yeah. Well,
there's about 250 Army regulars. They were supplemented with another 750 militia. So 1,000 troops, which again is not that much. It's not even, was that a regiment?
Well, if you're talking about just the Army personnel, I mean, 250, 2 divided by 250. You're telling me that John Tyler and William Henry Harrison made up 8% of the Army, or 0.8% of the Army contingent.
Yeah.
If they're both there.
A battalion. It's roughly a battalion. In some cases, it could be considered a battalion. So I was off by a regiment. Okay. A regiment's 2,000 to 5,000 soldiers. A battalion can be as low as 100 or up to 1,000. So a small amount, like barely what we'd consider a maneuvering force.
Who were we fighting?
We were fighting 600 to 700 Native Americans that were basically, Tippecanoe was this forward position fort, and we're going to go, day by day on this. And there was, 700 Native Americans, also with some militia volunteers that had mounted rifles, light dragoons, which are basically like horsemen who then dismount and fight. And they were managed by this guy, Captain Spire Spencer.
So when I hear dragoons, I can only think of StarCraft. I don't know if you ever played that. So did dragoons carry firearms then? Were they ranged cavalry units then?
Yeah, so a lot of times they would carry weaponry, related like firearm weaponry. I'm always like really cautious about saying like firearm weaponry because it's not what we consider obviously a firearm.
No, it'd be like
today.
a matchlock or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. So let's set the scene. All right, it's November 7th, 1811. The two belligerents meet. So basically, the United States had a column that was mixed. It was a mixed force. It was roughly 1,000 men. They had the Army regulars, and principally there were detachments from the 4th U.S. Infantry. There was a company of the 7th U.S. Infantry and a company of the U.S. Rifle Regiment, which That's kind of cool. Like, just for the record, like, this is, when I say rifle regiment at this time, these are some of actually the first rifle. Like, the old, sometimes there's a bunch of different nicknames from them, like the Tigermen and stuff like that, who fought, like, during the Revolutionary War, who used, like, who used rifle, not muskets that are smooth bore, but like actually
like
rifle.
Kentucky long arm, right? The Kentucky long rifle.
Kentucky long rifle. But this was this was a regiment. This would be a company from a regiment that was actually troops trained on how to use rifles, how to take long distance shot. Which in 1811 has got to be kind of interesting to fight against. Like, you're not used to the concept of somebody hitting a 200-300 yard shot on you.
It's starting to sound really unfair.
Oh no, this is super unfair. No,
Okay.
I shouldn't say that. Like, they're in Indian territory, so it's like, they're in the middle of nowhere. And so there's about 1,000 of them, consisting of regulars, volunteers, militias, and the overall commander was, it was actually the governor of the territory at the time, but Governor William Henry Harrison. And so there was also Colonel John Parker Boyd, who served as second in command, and he was in charge of the regulars. So he was in charge of the troops who were, here to fight. And there was another gentleman. This guy actually becomes kind of interesting in the history of the U.S. Army, but Major Samuel Wells, he was a mounted rifleman. And then in charge of the dragoons were Major Joseph Hamill Davis. So these were the dragoons from Indiana. Dragoons had been around for a while. This is also the time of Napoleon, like, running around. So, dragoons he was, obviously very good with dragoons. I don't know how, like, I try to look into some of the history of this. I don't know how effective dragoons were and how the U.S. conducted warfare, or even really how the Brits did, but Napoleon knew how to use them.
Well, that was line fighting. Like, you lined up a bunch of people, and then you stand off, you slug bullets, and then you use the cavalry to try to maneuver around and break lines. Right. Yeah,
and the other thing, exactly. And then, Napoleon's methods of warfare really, like, set the stage for the next, like, 100 years. Like, it was that
first person to really understand artillery and the power of that.
He basically combined artillery with maneuver warfare, and like, which is, listen, I know there's probably people who comment who know this much better than me, but that's kind of your first quasi combined arms that we see. And, like, as we all know, combined arms is wild. Like, you will lose to combined arms if you yourself are not combining arms. So in addition to that, there's also this Lieutenant Colonel Joseph Bartholomew, and then as the aforementioned Captain Spencer, who's hitting up the Yellow Jackets. So
was Tyler there too, or is it just Tyler 2? It was just part of the song.
Oh yeah, that was just Tyler 2 isn't also part of the ticket.
Was it actually in Tippecanoe?
It wouldn't have made a difference either way, given the massive disparity on weapons. But it's important to remember that they are in the middle of the Indian territory. They're essentially stuck in a fort. That's like would be the same as if we were on Mount Everest, right? Or in the middle of Sahara, or in the middle of Antarctica. Like, they're on their own.
So they're not out there looking for a fight. And is this like a scenario where, like, the Brits have bribed a group of Native Americans to attack them, or are we?
Yeah. So this is the time of the the Native Confederacy that Tecumseh ran.
Yeah.
So they're out in the middle of this territory. And now I always want to qualify when I say they're not out there looking for a fight. Like, they were in Indian territory that was claimed by Indiana. So it's kind of this weird, like, you're going to have some confrontations. It's 1811. The War of 1812 is just about to kick off. This is November of 1811. So, like, you're out there, you're looking for a fight, but you're like, hey, I'm here. Come fight me.
Right. Yeah.
So
you're antagonizing it by your presence.
Yeah. Then it gets awkward because, like, was it the Native Americans attacking them because they were in I keep using the term Indian territory. I just want to be clear. I'm using that term because
that's the term they used.
That's like the actual term that's used in these documents.
Right.
So, like, are the Native Americans upset that they're in Indian territory, claiming it as part of Indiana, or are the Brits inducing them to have some sort? Remember, during this time period, there's all these disputes of the Brits retaking forts all along what's supposed to be the demilitarized zone. Is it a mixture of all three? I kind of think it's a mixture of all three. I usually go.
Normally is. Right.
I don't like the Native Confederacy was very strong, and the Brits were battling Napoleon at the time. So if they weren't about to open up a third or fourth front, depending on how you look at the Napoleonic Wars, with a very strong Confederacy on their side. Like,
I'm glad you mentioned the Napoleon Wars, because that's we got a comment on one of our shorts about the Andrew Jackson's Battle of New Orleans again.
Yeah.
No, this is the best counter argument I've heard, but he said that because of the Battle of New Orleans, there was a bunch of British troops that are not available to fight Napoleon. So the battle did actually matter. If you look
But
at
not
it
to
through
the
that
United
lens.
States.
No, not to us. But it
Yeah.
mattered to
I don't even
France.
think that's a bad argument. I think that's a good argument.
That's an awesome argument, right?
That's a great argument
Right?
if you're talking about European history.
Yes,
I'm saying
yeah.
like specific to the United States being protected. That's actually a great argument. Whoever made that argument, that's a fine argument. Like I actually like that a lot, dude.
I can't remember who posted it, but thanks for that one.
No, thanks for that one, because I always call it a useless battle, but he's not wrong. It's not useless in the grand scheme. I'm just saying it's like if Eisenhower tried to... Yeah, it's like if Eisenhower tried to fight a bunch of Germans in 1950, I'd be like, oh, you didn't really.
Right.
Didn't really do anything. That's a good point. That is a good... mad respect. We got to figure out... We got to send him a quiche.
We got to figure out how to post a reply short.
Yeah.
I'll figure that out.
Be heated yelling at people.
Yeah. Anyway, sorry.
All right, so on the other side, the other belligerents on this was this I always take, you'll see this term a lot, multi-tribal native confederacy. I'm like, it's a confederacy. It's inherently multiple tribes. It's
that's the definition of a confederacy.
Yeah, right. The very definition of confederacy, a loose association of people. Like doesn't mean the freaking Civil War. So it was led by Tecumseh, but he wasn't actually there for that. He had his brother who Tinsakatawada. I looked up that pronunciation, so
I'm not even going to question it. It sounded like you nailed it.
Yeah, I tried it like 6 times, and even like I feel weird because like I don't know if that pronunciation is actually correct. I just know that's what they said it was. But his nickname was the Prophet.
Amazing.
I tried, dude. But he was also known as the Prophet, which is baller. I mean, title, right? Like,
if you're a general, that's a good nickname.
That's good. If you're leading troops, they're either gonna have a real good time or a real bad time. If you're named the Prophet, there's no in between. They did not have a good time.
No,
they did not have a good time at all. This was
not prophetic.
Didn't have a good time. It was bad. It was bad.
How many troops did they have?
They had about 700.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what were they armed with?
Actually, they actually had some. It ranges. So some of them had British weapons. Some of them more traditional crossbows. Some of them, it was. Relatively modern. Don't forget, at this point in time, a well-trained. I said crossbow. They didn't have crossbows.
Yeah, I was wondering. I was about to question that.
Bow and arrows.
Yeah. Okay.
And at this point in time, a well-trained archer could put much more lethal rounds down range much quicker than a musket. But I just said an interesting word there. I said musket. They ran into riflemen, well-trained riflemen, and that makes a distinction in this battle. So there's many times in history where your enemy's not obligated to tell you what weapons you're using. And we make jokes a lot, Kyle, about like, and one of my favorite ones, I think it was in one of our, I think there was a short that got made out of it, which is that like, it really must have stunk to be the first guy to find out what a stealth aircraft was.
Yeah,
that must have really stunk for Saddam. That must have not been a great time when you have the most heavily defended airspace above Baghdad, and then some spicy Doritos drop laser guided weapons. Laser guided. Nobody saw them coming.
Yep.
Nobody saw them on radar. And
just hit your radar installations.
Yep. Just made all that fancy technology you bought useless, and you thought you were doing a good job. You tried your best. You bought all the fancy stuff, and somebody just had something you didn't know existed. I'm not saying like the Native Americans engaging here obviously knew about riflemen. Obviously, they had rifles. Like that was something. But even at this time, the Brits hadn't fully integrated rifles. The French, I gotta look. Actually, I don't want to be too forward on this. I don't know if the French had integrated riflemen, and yet they may not have. But either way, riflemen were not like a thing yet, right? Even the prevalence of riflemen during the Revolutionary War was considered highly unique.
When we say riflemen, are we talking about cartridges too, or is this still like the same?
No, we're talking about very simple.
Okay, just definition. The fact that the barrel's rifled is
just the fact that the barrel's rifled, and that. And like, part of it is that, William Henry Harrison rides this huge wave after this and wins the presidency with that title. And, he has all this national acclaim and all that. But I want to be clear here. It's like any army would have ran into that. The Brits ran into that problem fighting us in the 1770s. They were like, oh my God, they keep hitting our commanders. It's like, how are they so accurate? It's like, because some dude's like, oh, I figured a way to spin this thing. But they basically ran into professionally trained riflemen. Now, is the United States this what it is today in terms of elite overwhelming military power? No. Are they still an incredibly formidable force, even for anybody far away from supply lines, but even to the Brits at this point? Yeah, and we would see it in the next 2 years. So sometimes I feel weird when it's like, oh, look how they got beaten. It's like,
it's not surprising.
Anybody would have got beaten. Like maybe Napoleon wouldn't have. Like that's
maybe.
To the point where like the Spanish and French didn't even try to, the French sold the Louisiana territory. The Spanish stopped administrating it because of like how far away it was and their inability to create like a military dominance over the area. So like
also you had a soon-to-be president coming out there and killing a bunch of your governors.
Yeah, that was problematic. Yeah,
didn't help.
It's just wild that's like we don't talk about that in school about him just invading a country. So that sets the scene, right? So it's about 700 on 1,000. There was many different Native American tribes. There's about 11-ish tribes. I did find out something really cool. So the University of Miami in Ohio. I was curious where that came from. There was a tribe called the Miami tribe.
Oh, what?
A native tribe called the Miami tribe. That's where Miami of Ohio comes from.
Oh. Yeah, there's so many words that you don't realize are Native American words, huh?
Yeah. Arkansas, right? Like,
yeah. Illinois. I didn't even realize that one was.
Really? I always thought that sounds like Frenchy to me.
I know, right?
Illinois.
Frenchy.
Well, Chicago was a big trade. Wasn't Detroit and Chicago both like very big French trading hubs for fur? Am I going insane?
They probably were, but I don't think Chicago is a French name.
Chicago. I'm partially French, so I don't want to get yelled at in the comment section for that.
Are you really Eric Mason?
My grandfather's first two, Maurice Lafayette Mason.
Oh, actually, you did tell me that story.
Yeah.
Never mind. Yeah, okay.
Maurice.
All right, so we set the stage.
So we set the stage.
Big discrepancy in weapons, probably even training, although I'm not to say that Native American people there probably weren't trained necessarily, but not in the same way as like the maneuver warfare and tactics that the American side was probably trained.
Ooh, that's a good point. So like I would say the natives were more battle hardened at this point.
Right. Yeah.
But I don't know if so like this is where it gets weird. And so what's important to remember is that we got to look at history at the time it happened. And Kyle, I think you brought up an excellent point here. And why I say that is we need to talk about, we're looking at this in 1811. So we really haven't seen that expansion westward. I mean, right now, Ohio is considered Northwest. Like the Northwest Ordinance was about Ohio. And I don't know anybody considers Ohio and Washington State in the same category. And so there really hasn't been this, you really have this back and forth with settlers and natives going all the way back to the Pilgrims, going back to there's plenty of disagreement on what you consider the first back and forth, like both sides have drawn blood. Some people say it's a Deerfield massacre, but the Deerfield massacre was in like mid-Massachusetts, like so really, really not into what we think of Manifest Destiny. But there has been a long period of engagement. But how you obviously had the French and Indian War, but the French and Indian War at this point is 50 years ago. It's like us looking at the Korean War.
I know that's a whole generation gone. Yeah.
Right, and you haven't had the War of 1812 yet, so you haven't had, but you've had the Tecumseh Confederacy, and you've had heated exchanges. But have you seen like military formation against military formation? Not really. You have the Seminole Wars, but that's in a completely different area of the country.
Like, do you even expect to see that when you go? You're like at the frontiers or the fringes of civilization. That'd be like two belligerents fighting it out in Antarctica at a research station.
I can't agree with you more, Kyle. I think that's something that gets lost in the Battle of Tippecanoe.
Right.
Is that it's not the Battle of New Orleans. It's not, as much as I want to make jokes about that, or the Battle of Fort McHenry in Baltimore, where it's like, oh, these are populated areas, going all the way back to the Battle of Bunker Hill. Like, these are populated areas. Like, this is exactly what you described. It's like two people battling it out. There's definitely a Call of Duty map that's like in Antarctica that I played when I was a kid. But it's very, SOCOM, I think, had something like that. That was super fun. But yeah, so it is different. It's different in the sense that it's this engagement happening honestly days and days away from the next even small town. And so what was Tippecanoe doing out there, right? What was the point of William Henry Harrison being out there? It was, I think, to establish, we're willing to defend this land. Almost like we call those shaping activity. It's like we're going to move to a place to see how you react, and then we're going to make decisions based on how you react. Well, here's the thing. I truly believe, and listen, there's tons of different historical takes on this, so I just want to be very clear to the listeners, like, you're going to hear different takes from different people, and like, I don't know if anybody's right. I don't
Not
know
on this show.
Wrong. Yeah, not on this show. You hit just what I wanted. West Virginia. You always see me wearing West Virginia stuff. So it's so I just want to be clear. Like, there's different ideas on like what was the goal of the Battle of Tippecanoe, or why did it happen? So it was never intended to be a battle. They wanted to set up a camp. But so shaping activities are usually like, hey, let's poke and pry each other and see what happens. This just blew up into a fight. So
it's sort of like when Russia sends jets into our airspace.
That's exactly
occasionally. Yeah, they're just kind of probing to see how we respond.
They can respond. Now imagine if like World War II air combat broke out. Like, oh damn. That 22 is just pumped. It's like, finally.
My bad.
So the fight goes on. It's a very, it's kind of interesting to set the scene. So shortly before first light, so it's like 4:30 in the morning on this. Now the cool part about talking about these types of battles is that normally we're used to like after action reports where you have like to the minute what happened, but like this is really a combination of a bunch of journals that were actually, believe it or not, like pretty well documented and well confirmed by officers. It kind of my favorite part about this. I thought I'd find all this embellishment, and there's tons of embellishment that come from a political campaign 30 years ago. Dude, to be honest with you, the Army provides like pretty awesome first-hand accounts that are just like completely unbiased. like it's like, and when I say Army, I mean like the Army, like West Point, like the Army,
right?
They have documentation lists.
So no kidding, huh?
So it's about 4:30 in the morning, and they start setting up like essentially a picket line, right? Like, and there was a couple sentries on guard. And the sentries on guard saw not like, you got to think about no ambient light, right? This is dawn, right? This is like the darkest time just before it gets up. But a couple of the sentries start seeing kind of movement off in the distance, so they raise alarm. And this is kind of, the battle's over now.
What?
The battle's over now.
It's already over?
Yeah. Like,
Jeez.
There's just a lot more, fortunately, there's a lot more lives to be lost. But right now, the battle's over. Because what happened is the prophet, he wanted to basically, just to roll back a little bit, there was a settlement a little ways away called Prophetstown. And he had basically sat down with his advisors. Again, you're going to have a really good time or a really bad time if that's the name of your place. And basically, it sat down with his advisors and said, hey, what should we do? We have this American Army detachment over there, and they advised him to do a pre-dawn surprise attack, and they were going to rely not on this response to shaping movements, but they were going to try and go in there. They even discussed assassinating William Henry Harrison as part of it. And what was kind of interesting is that they also were like, hey, so it sounds like the prophet was like, he wasn't a huge fan of that, but then they were like, we're going to send warriors to go through some of the forest and swampland around there, and they'll come in and they'll kill the sentries and rush a perimeter and, sow panic and all this stuff. So he was like, no, that's a good idea. We'll attack them early. We'll kill the sentries so they can't raise an alarm. And then we'll go in there and these troops will be undisciplined and they won't be able to fight us because we'll be so close to them that, we'll have an advantage.
Oh, man, they overplayed.
Yeah.
It sounded like they thought they were going in against colonists, not Army.
And don't forget, a big reason why the U.S. Army is doing this at the time is that there's all these attacks on these villages, on the settlements. So the Army's out there to kind of establish, and we remember from the previous episodes, William Henry Harrison gained a lot of national success of being the guy, not to start wars in these territories, but to end wars in these territories and create peacefulness. He didn't want to attack random. I genuinely don't believe he wanted to just have endless war. He's not a Jacksonian.
That's kind of always been our military philosophy too. Is we have troops stationed out in different places where they can be the targets to keep the citizenry safe. Right?
Yeah, exactly. And that's so he's doing that. He's like, okay. I personally think William Henry Harrison was prepared for something. I do think if you gave him truth serum, he'd say, I didn't think anything was going to happen. Who attacks 1,000 troops? Like, who's attacking 1,000 troops with rifles? That's an insane in a defended space. Like that's insane. Like, I think he would have said, oh, so the British are attacking. We're at war with the Brits. I think that's what he would have said if that had happened.
You said that there was a group of regulars in there, too. It's like,
Yeah, they were a group of regulars on the U.S. side.
U.S. side, yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's even, like, scarier.
Yes, right? That's what I mean, yeah.
But, so the prophet, he gathered all his followers on a knoll that was overlooking the field before they attacked. And I find it funny because we have records that they were using drumming, that they were drumming and doing this ritual. And I'm always like, if they're overlooking the field on a knoll,
could you
think
not
the
hear
troops
that?
are like, is that guy drumming up there? Like, I feel like I'm in the middle of nowhere and somebody's just drumming on top of a mountain. I'm going to be like,
does that not make you start looking around to see?
I mean, guys, get ready.
Yeah, right?
But he did say, and there are a couple contemporary historians who mentioned this, but I still want to be careful that they're contemporary historians mentioning this, not direct sources, that he then convinced his soldiers that they were immune from bullets.
The prophet did?
Yeah.
Or William Henry Harrison?
No, the prophet. That'd be wild.
I know, right?
So he gets hit with an arrow. It's like, I told you.
Oh, man, that's a lie that doesn't last very long. That gets called out too quick.
I mean, that's what happened during the Boxer Rebellion in China.
Yeah.
They were taught that if they, like, practice martial arts, that would make them immune to bullets. And then, like, I forget which. There's a famous Marine who, like, held off, like, a couple hundred of them with a machine gun because he was like...
sounds like York.
Yeah. He was just like, yeah.
Oh, God, that's...
work.
That's got to destroy your humanity.
Yeah, it's got to feel weird that they just keep coming. Like, can you guys stop? Like, this clearly is a...
This
like,
is
try
taking a lot
else.
out of me, you guys. like
I feel bad about this.
I'm going to live with this.
Jeez. So the battle's over. Essentially, the minute those the sentries raised the alarm.
How close was this drummer? Like, were they able to like take pot shots at them up there on that hill?
Oh no, they were far away. I imagine it's been very faint, ill-defined drumming, and from what I read.
Yeah.
So the battle begins. The initial contacts are actually very, very heated. So it ends up being these heavy assaults on multiple sides. Now, what's best to understand is Tippecanoe, the defense of Tippecanoe was almost a pure rectangle, right? Mm-hmm. Now, there's advantages to that, right? Good, strong, stretched out flanks, kind of a very stout front. It makes it hard to attack, but it also means it's rigid in a sense. Like
right.
The corners are weaknesses, like you can be pushed in, right? It's not that smooth gradient that you usually see of a front. We think of like World War I, right? Mm-hmm. So these heavy assaults keep coming in, and on the southern edge, so this is to the rear. Captain Spencer, his Yellow Jackets, who were like great riflemen, and then Captain Warwick's company, they actually absorb the attack. So the prophet's idea was like he was going to break the line and sow all this panic. But because the sentry spotted people so early, it gave Captain Spencer and Captain Warwick's guys a chance. Now, these are regulars. These are not just,
These aren't militiamen. These aren't drafted.
Right. These are
settlers.
Guys.
Yeah.
Right. These aren't just like untrained troops. These are disciplined. And that's the problem, is that they didn't get panic right off the bat. Which, like, let's be honest, they got panic on the rear. It doesn't matter how good your weaponry is. If you're inside the wire, you're inside the wire.
But is that really what every battle comes down to? It's just who's going to blink first?
Yeah. I mean, I could make a joke about like a thermonuclear weapon, but like, yeah.
Yeah. Fair enough.
So Captain Warwick and Captain Spencer are both killed. Are both killed in this in this exchange. Okay. Early on, they led them in from the front, so they're both killed. They are replaced by two junior officers, John Tipton and Thomas Montgomery, who rally their troops. What's that?
I thought for sure you're going to say Tyler.
That'd be great. No, John Tipton and Thomas Montgomery, who are one's an NCO and one's just a lieutenant. And so they actually rallied the troops, and this is where like the idea of America's like junior officers and NCO Corps actually really gets the military academies actually mentioned this of like, all right, we lost our captain, stepping up and actually holding off the attack. And they end up holding those two angles of the rear of the rectangle together, giving Harrison enough time to shift reinforcements, including the vaunted U.S. 4th Infantry, is moved from the front of the formation, expecting that frontal assault, to the back, and they proceed to. It's a massacre. It's a massacre. Yeah. Some people don't describe it as a massacre. The accounts I've read is that basically they held off long enough that they were able to pivot the 4th U.S., and they just marched down, and they just crushed that rear assault. Now, what should have happened after that is the Prophet probably should have been like, oh, that failed. We should
regroup.
We should regroup, and we should pull back. And this is where, William Henry Harrison, this decision that the Prophet makes almost signs William Henry Harrison's electorate bid, is because as the warriors are attacking, attacking the front. Now they think what they're doing is they think they're soaking up resources, and the rear assault is just waiting to finally break through. Right. And they probably felt really confident, and I don't blame the Prophet for this. He probably felt really confident when he saw the 4th U.S. Infantry break back. He was probably like, "Oh, good, good. This is going to be
right." Push farther on the front, yeah.
Yeah, and so these warriors keep rushing out of the dark. It ends up falling apart. So what ends up happening is they're getting onslaught. They get hit by this rifle fire. They're then retreating, not like retreating off the battlefield, like recondensing into these, like, one historian described it as localized, uncoordinated assaults. Mm-hmm. And they were coming back in. Now, I think what they thought was that this was going to be like raid tactics. Well, the sun's working against them. This was just before first light.
Yeah.
So now the lights are coming
lighter and lighter and lighter, yeah.
And that regrouping action is just creating a target-rich environment. And they're getting slaughtered. So, but as this is going on, the Prophet's drum never stopped, which meant that, the attack had to continue. Eventually what happens is these disparate groups of troops who survived the initial assault, they regroup, and they still hear the war drum going. So they try and here's what we're going to consolidate and try and hit some of these gaps we formed. And when they did, Harrison by this time had mobilized his reserves fully. So they're out there, and he tapped George Prescott, famed captain at the time, not General Prescott yet, but Captain George Prescott. Literally, I would argue, became maybe not the best general, but one of the best strategic minds, probably until Omar Bradley decided to jump on Pershing decided to jump on a battlefield. And he ordered Captain Prescott to rally his regulars and bring them to the critical points. Now, this is where Henry Harrison, really becomes aggressive. Mm-hmm. So Prescott's regulars push in behind the militia and the riflemen. The riflemen proceed to start hammering at close range and giving close range cover as the militias advance forward. The war drum keeps beating, mm-hmm. which means they're just dealing with assault after assault after assault. But they're just running into walls of fire. And now you have accurate rifle fire, you have advancing militia who's going to be able to, pretty handedly defeat, an exhausted contingency of native troops.
Especially depleted.
Yes, with George Prescott. I keep wanting to say George Prescott regulars. Well, the U.S. 4th Infantry has shored up the rear, and nothing's getting behind there. And the Prophet never bothered to be like, oh, what's going on here? Maybe I stopped this. So in a last gasp to see if he could break the lines, there's an assault on the northern side of the enclosure, northern side of the rectangle, right? And it was with mounted troops. So it was with you think of, I don't want you to think of like Comanche or Apache, but mounted troops, and they were trying to hit there quick on the line. Yeah. And they had some success at first and actually kill a major, Joseph Davis, who was he's super celebrated. I think there's a county named after him in Kentucky, and he's wounded. Mm-hmm. But by this point, daylight's fully come out, and the regulars advance to the front towards this assault. Now, as they're advancing towards the assaults, they have the riflemen firing, the militia providing support. The regulars fix bayonets, rally with the militia, and then go on the offense. And they proceed to, to attack the attackers head on and crush that front. And then once the damage can be seen, it is a pretty horrific sight. They were firmly defeated.
I just want to say to it, I think it's something like 20 to 30% casualties, and most armies typically break and throw down arms and run away. Yeah. Like if they manage to push past that, that's pretty freaking courageous.
Yeah, it's
that's like their version of the battle or the charge of the Light Brigade.
Yeah,
right.
So it's that. But it is one of those examples of modern weaponry and tactics. It doesn't matter who you are. If you can have, you can't fight that. But you can't fight it using old school things. It's like, you can have the best knight in shining armor trying to fight you. But so the American casualties were heavy. So they suffered about an 19% casualty rate.
Oh, really? That much?
Yeah, they had.
This wasn't a one-sided beatdown as much like you made it sound. Not as bad as you made it. They got some hits.
I mean, some estimates put it as high as like 12-1.
I mean,
yeah, I'm trying to find like another battle that would be equivalent to that, just absolute, that absolute discrepancy. So there were 37 were killed outright. The 25 were mortally wounded. The U.S. infantry, kind of interesting, interesting part of this is that they reported that I'm still kind of interested in this, but the U.S. infantry reported they had about 77 confirmed killed in action, as in they killed in action, and they wounded another 300. That has never. I couldn't find any contemporary report to like. Sorry, not contemporary report, like after action report to like
nothing to confirm the numbers.
Yeah, and at the time there were reports that the Native Americans were completely wiped out. Then there's reports that only a couple dozen were even injured. Yeah, it's how much of I cannot for the life of me get like an explanation on like which
the
numbers
75 and 300 wounded seems reasonable.
I know this probably isn't what I should say. I kind of take the Army's advice, even though like that's one of the belligerents, so you shouldn't just take one.
Right.
They seem to have pretty good records. Like it seems to
based
make
on
sense.
What you're saying from the journals and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean it's so the aftermath. What made the president is after this battle, we see these dispatches start coming out, and Harrison's reports, after action reports, are published on November 28th in it's something called the National Intelligencer, which is a horrible word to have to write, and Niles' Weekly Register actually reprinted the story.
It was just the publicity of his reports that made this battle so famous.
Yeah. Yep.
That's
and
so
kind of interesting.
Right?
Madison, so basically Harrison wrote a letter to Madison with this detailed narrative explaining to the president what happened, and that got leaked to the press, and people loved it. And over the next couple of days, Harrison would lead troops up to Prophetstown and wipe it off the map. From my understanding, it wasn't wiped off the map like, they committed all these war crimes. I mean, literally there's nobody left, and they were like, oh, we're going to make sure people can't use this again.
Up. Yeah.
I didn't see anything about any war crime occurring, but I also don't want to make it sound like there weren't war crimes that were occurring.
No, and Harrison could have been smart enough to not write about it.
Yeah. So if anybody can point out a source on that, I'm not going to argue with you on that. I would just be like, oh, okay, I just was unaware of that source.
Yep.
And one of the coolest things, I think, is that the Americans found a bunch of British weapons with the slain soldiers. And so the Americans made it very clear to known British agents of what they had found. And the Brits paused on supplying, let's just say, forts. Let's use the term fort because it is military and military settlements too close to American lines. And there are some people who believe that pause actually stripped some of the logistics capabilities at the beginning of the War of 1812. It made it less, it made it harder to actually sustain fighting on the Western Front. On the Western Front. And this story persisted. This was a lot, and it's funny because the people who voted for William Henry Harrison were actually people who were probably kids when their dad was telling them about Tippecanoe. Oh, Tippecanoe!
Oh, they're probably just reading it at the table together.
Reading it at the table.
All right.
But it's a battle that made a president.
I have something for you because in the last episode you were talking about how awesome you thought the song was. The Tyler.
Yeah.
I have the rendition of the song that we can actually play if you want to listen to it.
I just hope it's by DMX.
No, it is not. It's actually.
What's the cause of this commotion?
Is that actually the song?
Yeah.
This isn't trademarked?
No, this is the copyright-free one. It played in the last episode. You didn't get to hear it.
Why is this not my ringtone?
Right? So I can send that to you if you want, but I don't know if it's quite as awesome as you thought it was.
I'm still down. I think I'm
you
still
into
right.
it? I had
Dude,
that stupid song stuck in my
imagine-
head. It actually is catchy. It is
Could
catchy.
you imagine, like, nobody's, like, thought to put music to campaigns, and some dude just drops that absolute fire track?
Oh, no. There have been songs and campaigns going all the way back to, I think, Washington. If you look.
Were they that fire?
I think Andrew Jackson's was a little bit better, even.
Did they have, like,
Sons of
words?
Kentucky?
Like, I get, like, the music.
I'll have to pull them up again. There's a whole,
Okay.
I think it's the Smithsonian or one of those that actually has an album of all of the campaign songs that you can. I've been meaning to send them a letter because I actually thought it'd be cool to do each series with the campaign slogan.
Yeah, that'd be sick.
Right?
Yeah.
But it's really hard to get that music.
What? Now I'm sad.
But I'm pretty sure it looked like even Washington had a song, but I don't know if they went back and like reassigned it to him later on down the line. John Adams had a song. Like they all, yeah.
John Adams' song's just him yelling at people.
Leave me alone.
In a wicked strong Boston accent.
I'm
Dude, there's
smarter
a
than
book-
you.
I was
I'm
picking
better.
out one of my best friends is having a kid, and I was like, I was in the paper store with my wife, and we're like picking out stuff for the babies. I got him like a pacifier that makes it look like he has a mustache, and like
So
Goodnight
cool.
Moon, My First Truck, the book on like my first math book, because like the kid guy's been my best friend since I've been like 2 years old. But then they had Goodnight Massachusetts, and I said to Tiffany, I was like, how popular do you think it would be if I just if I read this book in like a wicked thick Boston accent? Be like, good night garbage truck. Next page like, good night lobster boat.
That'd be amazing.
I might do that. So Kyle, you may get like a video for me randomly of me just,
Dude, I'll set you up on
good
here.
night Red Sox.
I'll set you up on here.
I think that'd be pretty funny.
Right? Oh,
Good
all
night
right.
Moon.
We ready to take us home here?
Oh yeah, absolutely. No, I think it's a good ending. Just we fade out.
All right, well, I think the waving of that white flag symbolizes the end of our time together today, which means that it's time for everyone's favorite part. It's time to jump into the comments section and tell us if Eric was justified in commandeering the last 60th minute of your life. And if you're shy and don't like criticizing people in public, you can email us at chinashopproductions@gmail.com. On your way out, hit the thumbs up, sub on your favorite platform, and visit the website at BuckStartsHerePodcast to stay up to date. We'll see you all next week. Produced by China Shop Productions.